All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're taking a deep dive into Tolstoy's My Confession.
Oh, this one's a doozy.
It really is. We're going to explore the spiritual crisis that gripped him, and let me tell you, it's quite a journey.
And a fascinating one, too.
We're talking about Leo Tolstoy, this literary giant at the height of his success.
You'd think he'd be on the top of the world.
You would,
Yeah.
but instead of basking in all that success, he's wrestling with these huge, existential questions.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Like, what's it all for?
Exactly. What does it all lead to in the end?
He even famously asks that, right? What is it for? What does it lead to? I mean, that's the heart of it, isn't it? He's achieved everything, but it all feels meaningless.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt like that? Maybe not on Tolstoy's scale, but that sense of something missing, even when things are going well on the surface.
Absolutely. That's what makes Tolstoy's struggle so relatable, This feeling of emptiness. It's a universal human experience. And Tolstoy captures it perfectly. He describes this growing dread as a mortal internal disease. He even compares it to drops of ink slowly turning into this black blot that consumes his whole being.
That's powerful imagery. It's like this emptiness starts to overshadow everything else in his life.
Exactly.
He even says it became more important than his writing, his family, almost like a looming presence of death.
It's a classic existential crisis, wouldn't you say?
Totally. That moment when all the outward achievements just don't fill the void inside. So what does he do?
Well, he tries to find solace in the things that most people turn to. His family, his work, even art itself.
Right. He systematically examines every aspect of his life, searching for an answer.
But nothing seems to stick.
He looks at his family and wonders, why should they live?
He contemplates art and dismisses it as just an adornment of life.
When life itself has lost its appeal, it's heartbreaking, but it's also really thought-provoking, isn't it?
Absolutely. Tolstoy's struggle really mirrors this philosophical concept called nihilism.
Right. The idea that life is inherently meaningless.
It's a bleak outlook. And Tolstoy, he doesn't shy away from exploring its depths. He even paints a picture of this nihilistic despair with a metaphor about a traveler trapped in a well.
Oh, yeah, the traveler in the well with the dragon below and the wild beast above.
And he's clinging to a twig, right?
A twig that's being gnawed on by mice. That image really stayed with me.
It perfectly captures that sense of inescapable doom that Tolstoy is wrestling with.
Exactly. So we have Tolstoy staring into this abyss of nihilism, seeing no apparent meaning in life. But he doesn't just give up, does he?
No, he doesn't.
He embarks on this quest for knowledge. What was he hoping to find, do you think?
He was looking for answers. He throws himself into his studies, desperately seeking something, anything, in all the branches of knowledge acquired by men.
He wasn't just passively pondering these questions, was he?
No, not at all. He was actively, almost frantically searching for a lifeline.
Like he was combing through every library, every scientific journal, every philosophy book ever written.
Hoping to find that one piece of wisdom that would make everything click into place.
And, well, as he explores this realm of knowledge, he stumbles upon a very frustrating realization. He divides knowledge into two hemispheres.
Okay, I'm listening.
The first is experimental sciences.
The hard sciences.
Exactly, which excel at explaining the physical world but remain silent on the ultimate question.
Of life's purpose.
Right. And the second is the abstract sciences, philosophy, theology, things like that.
They acknowledge the question.
But they offer no concrete answers.
So he's basically saying that science can tell us how things work, but can't tell us why we're here or what it all means.
Exactly. And this is where Tolstoy's frustration with rational knowledge becomes really clear. He's hitting the limits of reason.
When it comes to these deeply personal existential questions.
And science, even with all its advancements, can't provide the solace he's seeking.
So where does he turn next? Well, this is where things get really interesting. Instead of continuing to debate with academics and philosophers, Tolstoy shifts his focus to something completely different.
Really?
He starts observing unlearned and poor people.
The common folk? Interesting.
What was it about these people that drew his attention? What could they offer that the intellectuals couldn't? It was a stark contrast, his own struggle to find meaning, so intellectualized, and then these simple folks with their profound faith.
He decided to step out of the ivory tower and into the real world.
Exactly.
Oh.
Seeking wisdom not from books, but from everyday people.
It's a humbling shift, isn't it?
Absolutely. And he discovers that For these people, faith wasn't just a set of rules or rituals
It was a way of life.
woven into their daily existence, giving them strength in the face of adversity.
Mm.
He saw meaning in their hard work, their connection to the land, their close communities.
And their acceptance of suffering and death, those concepts had really tormented Tolstoy, right?
Oh, absolutely. But their faith seemed to provide a framework for understanding these universal experiences.
Turning them from sources of fear into opportunities for growth.
Yes, and that's crucial. Their faith wasn't about denying the harsh realities of life.
But about finding meaning and purpose within those realities.
Right. Their belief in a higher power, a divine plan, gave them a sense of belonging and hope, something that transcended their individual circumstances.
So was Tolstoy simply rejecting reason in favor of blind faith?
Not at all. He was a brilliant mind, never fully abandoned his rational thinking.
Uh,
He started to see reason and faith not as opposing forces.
but as complementary ways of knowing. Interesting.
He recognized that some truths, those deep aspects of human existence, can't be fully grasped through reason alone,
So it's not about choosing one over the other.
but finding a balance between the two.
Got it. Letting reason and faith inform each other.
Precisely. And he began to see faith as a different kind of knowledge, what he called irrational knowledge.
Irrational.
It's not about abandoning logic, but acknowledging that reason has limits, recognizing the validity of intuition, lived experience, and those deep-seated beliefs that shape how we see the world.
You know, we often hear blind faith used in a negative way, as if faith is opposed to intelligence.
Yeah, like it's somehow anti-intellectual.
But Tolstoy is suggesting that true faith is more nuanced than that.
I agree. True faith isn't about blindly accepting dogma or shutting down your critical faculties. It's about opening yourself to a different way of knowing.
A way that embraces both the rational and the intuitive.
The seen and the unseen.
Irrational knowledge. It's a fascinating concept, but it's also a bit abstract.
Sure.
Do you have a concrete example? How did this play out in Tolstoy's life?
Well, think about his observation of the peasants finding meaning in their hard work.
Okay.
That wasn't some logical conclusion.
Right.
It was a deep understanding that came from their connection to the land, their community, and their faith. A truth that transcended intellectual analysis. It resonated at a soul level.
So irrational knowledge is like having a gut feeling about something, a deep inner knowing.
You got it. And for Tolstoy, this was incredibly liberating. It helped him reconcile his intellectual doubts with his yearning for meaning. He realized that faith wasn't about abandoning reason,
It was about complementing it.
expanding it, allowing it to access a deeper level of understanding,
He was expanding his definition of knowledge itself.
recognizing that truths can be found in unexpected places, not just in books and academic debates.
So Tolstoy finds meaning not in grand theories or scientific discoveries, but in the everyday lives of simple people living their faith.
Wow.
And it's a message that still resonates today. In our world obsessed with data and technology, it's easy to forget that some truths can only be accessed through the heart, through intuition, through faith.
It's a reminder that meaning and purpose aren't things we achieve, but something we cultivate within ourselves. Exactly. Now, Tolstoy didn't stop at just observing others' faith. He started his own spiritual journey, wrestling with doubts, exploring different expressions of faith, ultimately arriving at his own unique understanding of Christianity.
Right. He didn't just accept the first belief system he encountered.
No. He actively engaged with the complexities of faith, studying different religions and grappling with the challenges of reconciling his intellectual background with his new spiritual leanings.
And it's this personal struggle, this willingness to question, that makes his journey so compelling and relevant even today. But speaking of questioning, Tolstoy wasn't impressed by the Orthodox Christians in his own social circle. He found their faith superficial. It lacked the authenticity he saw in the common people. What was it about the elite's faith that turned him off?
He was critical of what he called pseudo-believers, people who talked about faith but didn't live it. He saw their faith as a performance.
For sure.
Yeah, a way to keep up appearances rather than a genuine expression of their inner beliefs.
So he was looking for a faith that was more than just words.
More than rituals and dogma. He wanted to see faith in action, faith that transformed lives and offered a genuine connection to something bigger than themselves.
And he found that authenticity in the lives of the peasants, the pilgrims, those who lived their faith with sincerity.
They embraced both the joys and sorrows of life, finding meaning even in suffering.
Tolstoy was deeply moved by this. He saw it as the path to true fulfillment. But it raises a question. How did he reconcile his own rational mind with this newfound faith? How did he bridge that gap between the intellectual and the spiritual?
That's a great question. And it takes us to the heart of Tolstoy's concept of irrational knowledge. But before we get into that, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
Okay.
We've seen Tolstoy's descent into existential despair, his exploration of knowledge, and his encounter with the simple yet profound faith of the working class. We've seen him challenge conventional notions of success and happiness, grapple with philosophical concepts like nihilism, and begin to see faith not as a rejection of reason, but as a different way of knowing.
A way that embraces both the rational and the intuitive.
Exactly. And it's this tension, this wrestling with both head and heart, that makes his journey so relatable, so human. He shows us that the search for meaning is not a straight line, but a winding path.
Filled with doubts, challenges, and moments of deep insight.
As we move into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how Tolstoy navigates this tension between reason and faith. We'll delve into irrational knowledge and see how it shaped his understanding of the world, his own spiritual journey.
Okay, so we left off with Tolstoy wrestling with this idea of irrational knowledge. How did he, a man of such intellect, reconcile that with his newfound faith?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? Tolstoy isn't saying we should throw logic out the window.
Right.
He's wrestling with the fact that reason alone can't answer life's big questions.
Hmm.
Irrational knowledge is what he calls those truths that go beyond that,
Hmm.
Intuition, lived experience, those things we feel deeply but can't always prove.
So it's not about ditching our brains, but acknowledging there are things beyond pure logic. But what does that look like, practically speaking? Got any examples?
Remember how the peasants accepted death?
Yeah.
That wasn't some cold, calculated decision.
Right.
It stemmed from their faith, their whole view of life's cycle, their connection to something bigger than themselves. It was a deeply felt understanding, true at their core, not just in their heads.
So it's like that gut feeling you get even when you can't justify it with a spreadsheet. It's knowledge from a different place.
Exactly. And Tolstoy recognized that this kind of knowledge was just as valid, maybe even more so, than purely intellectual knowledge, especially when facing tough stuff. It gave them meaning, purpose.
Makes sense. But doesn't that open the door to believing anything, following any whim? How do you balance that with critical thinking?
Tolstoy wasn't advocating for blind faith or ditching reason altogether. It was about broadening what knowledge even means. Like, hey, we use reason, but also faith, intuition, what we've lived through. All of it matters.
He's not saying toss out your logic. He's saying your toolbox has more than one tool. It's pretty deep.
It was liberating for him, allowed him to have both his doubts and his yearning for meaning. Faith wasn't the opposite of reason anymore, but something that added to it, enriched it, gave him deeper understanding.
Okay, so no more crisis of faith versus reason, but what about different expressions of faith? He didn't just accept any belief system, right?
No, he didn't. He studied Buddhism, Islam, others. But he was drawn to a particular type of Christianity. Not the formal, fancy kind of the elite, but the lived-out faith he saw in the common people.
He was really put off by that church crowd, wasn't he? What bothered him about their faith?
He called them pseudo-believers, all talk and no action. Their faith was like a social obligation, not a true conviction. It lacked that genuine, life-changing power he witnessed in others who walk the walk every single day.
So it had to be more than words or rituals. It had to shape how people actually lived, how they faced hardship, found joy. That's what impressed him.
Exactly. It wasn't about escaping life's tough stuff, but finding meaning within it. That really resonated with Tolstoy. He saw it as the path to true fulfillment.
His whole journey must have had a huge impact on how he saw the world, not just his personal beliefs.
Absolutely. Embracing irrational knowledge changed everything. He saw things with new eyes, the connection between everything, beauty in simple things, the inherent dignity of every human being.
It wasn't just about believing in God, but a whole different way of being in the world. But how does that apply to us? And now, though, we're not 19th century Russian novelists.
That's the cool part. Tolstoy's story is timeless. In our data-obsessed world, he's reminding us to be open to different ways of knowing. Don't dismiss something just because it can't be perfectly explained by logic or science.
Like he's saying, hey, your gut feelings matter. What you've lived through, those deep beliefs that shape you, it all matters.
Right. It's not irrational in a bad way. It holds a different kind of wisdom. The challenge Tolstoy throws down is to find the balance. Use your head, but also your heart. Trust those gut feelings and recognize the truths we can't always put into words.
So where does that leave us? What's your sure, What helps you through the rough waters and find meaning in the chaos? What kinds of knowledge do you value?
Tolstoy didn't give us a step-by-step guide, more like.
Yeah.
He showed us the power of asking these questions, being open to unexpected answers, finding our own way to what feels meaningful.
This deep dive into my confession has been, whoa, intense, thought-provoking, and yeah, maybe even a little uncomfortable at times. Lots to chew on. Thanks for taking this journey with us. Until next time.